What if your patient conversations could be turned into compliant documentation and not over the use of lots of time, but instantly, accurately? And what if AI can free physical therapists from paperwork and give them back more time for patient care? Could smarter documentation tools improve compliance and reduce denials? This and more topics we'll discuss today at Your Practice, Your Money, where clinical success meets financial freedom. See you in a moment. Welcome to Your Practice, Your Money, the podcast where clinical success meets financial freedom. I'm your host, Dr. Dimitrios Kostopoulos, and today we're diving into a revolution in clinical documentation. Every physical therapy owner knows the struggle. Too much time spent typing notes, chasing compliance after the notes are written, and dealing with billing denials. But what if AI could handle that part for you, not only accurately, but also efficiently? And what if that could be done in real time? And today, I'm joined by Dr. Pedro Teixeira, who is the co-founder and CEO of PredictionHealth. PredictionHealth now is a prompt company. And since 2017, Pedro has been leading innovations that transform clinical documentation through artificial intelligence. His team has developed a documentation assistant type of program that converts patient and provider conversations into compliant notes and allows clinicians to focus on what really matters, which is patient care. Also, Pedro holds both an MD and a PhD and a master's in mechanical informatics from Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And he worked there alongside leaders in informatics. And he also has a bachelor's in biomechanical sciences and computer science from Harvard. His mission bridges data, science, and clinical excellence to improve the quality of patient care. So, Pedro, welcome to Your Practice, Your Money.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. And I have to say that in our physical therapy practices, we used PredictionHealth from the very early days that you guys developed the whole program. And it was striking to see the changes that we had in compliance of documentation before and after. I'm talking about day and night. I'm talking about like going from failing notes to really having, more than 90% and all that. So anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but I just want to get a little bit from your side about the vision for creating PredictionHealth and the systems. What type of problem PredictionHealth is set out to solve? What was broken, in other words, in clinical documentation that inspired you to create this AI solution?
From very, very early on, my co-founder and I, Ravia Atreya, also was an MD PhD over at Vanderbilt. And we were very excited and very idealistic when we started. We started together in 2009. And we were so excited because we had gone into, healthcare because we wanted to help patients. We both think that health is very important. If you don't have your health, what do you have? It's hard to appreciate really anything else. And so that was very important to us. And we're also very nerdy. So we were both interested in computer science. I had done a minor, he had done a major in computer science. And we sort of had this similar sort of vision that the computers should help us take care of patients. And Vanderbilt at the time had built their own electronic health record. So they had their own system that they had built there. And we were very excited because then they had a lot of access to data, and we had all these visions of what could you do, right? Because the computer, again, should be helpful. That's what we try to do. We try to be very helpful if we can figure out how, right? But when we then were actually there in grad school doing research, seeing patients, we saw that there's actually a huge gap between the vision of like what you want the computer systems to help you do and like the way it really works out. Because there's so much you have to do with documentation and the typing and the system. And it doesn't always feel like it's helping you. It doesn't feel like it's smart, right? And actually understands what you're trying to accomplish and then make it easier to accomplish that goal. So at a very broad level, that was it. We wanted to make the systems very smart because if we could make them smart and helpful, we could help clinicians take better care of patients. And that was the overarching mission. And we just got to discover along the way, there are a lot of gaps, technology-wise, data organization-wise, some of the things more exciting than others that were sort of in the way. And so when we started full-time in 2017, it was to build the tools that we wish we had ourselves and to put those in the hands of clinicians so that, again, they could take the best possible care of the patients in front of them.
From a technical point of view, as a matter of applied technology, what components of that did you contribute in the design versus your business partner?
So we were very aligned in like what the vision was, and then we're also both very technical. So he would build the back end server side, and I would build the front end or the user interface that people would use. And we built and threw away a lot of things over the years. That was kind of the division of labor. We both got to do a lot of work on taking the data sets that Vanderbilt had, and for our PhD projects, for example, analyzing them to try to look to see if we could understand why some patients get sick, how they get better, find patients that are at higher risk. And one of the key lessons there that most people don't realize is that healthcare data, even at like the most advanced institution, at the time, building all these things with their own EMR, it's so complicated that it ends up being very messy. So you have to put an amazing amount of work in to analyze and organize and clean the data before you can even start to do really interesting machine learning problems, right? Or even like a simple algorithm, right? Most of the work, 80% of the work in data science is data janitor work, where you're just cleaning it up and trying to organize it so then you can use it for whatever the application was. And so, we did entire, PhDs and wrote papers on doing like one or two problems. And we were very disappointed because in our minds, you should be doing hundreds of thousands of probably models and use cases so that you could help people with all the different diseases across all the different specialties and all the settings in healthcare. And if it takes us this much effort to do one or two things, it's going to be impossible to get to all those use cases. So we started with this kind of very nerdy, data cleanliness, data organization perspective. But then I think we're able to build a lot of really interesting things along the way. And when we hit the PT and OT and SLP, the compliance problems that they have, right, in the rehab therapy industry benefits a lot from having the data organized for doing machine learning predictions so that you can have something like a compliance model that you can run all of the sentences on all of the notes, or having a CPT prediction model to help identify when there's gaps between what you're coding versus what you justified. And a lot of opportunity, honestly, there as well. So that nerdy data organization sort of bias of ours really set us up to then add a lot of things. And then, of course, most recently, the AI documentation assistant, because nobody likes to write their notes at, like 1 a.m. versus getting some rest.
How does your AI-powered assistant actually will work in a physical therapy setting? Mm-hmm. And what happens then when the physical therapist and the patient have either a conversation or an examination and all that? So how would that work?
So we try to make it as simple as possible. And so if you're going to do an initial evaluation on your patient, you're about to walk in the room. There's a lot of ways to do the recording, but the most common is you have your laptop and you just are in your EMR the way you would normally be. And let's say Mr. John Smith is there today for us to go see. And our thing just shows up in the corner, a little record button. You just hit record, and then you walk in, and you see the patient. And you talk to them normally. You ask them what brought them in. You ask for all of the usual signs and symptoms, aggravating factors, et cetera. You can do your physical exam, of course, do some interventions, and you can do an assessment. And you don't have to call anything out word for word as if you're dictating. You're just literally talking to the person. So if you're providing the assessment back to the patient, you can do so in a very simple, education focused way. Like, oh, here's what I think is going on. I think this is the most likely diagnosis. I want to make sure that you're very compliant with your HEP plan. Here's the types of things that we're going to do. And you just talk to the person. And then you come back to the computer whenever you want and you hit stop. And within 6 to 10 seconds, you get a full draft of your entire note that just shows up on the screen. Then you can just review. And if it looks good to you, you just accept it. So it's a button that you click to start it. You go see the patient and you click to stop. And you mentioned earlier that very quickly you saw a big improvement in the compliance scores, right? And in the quality of the documentation. I think in part it's because most people are clinicians because they care about their patients and they do a good job of seeing that person. It's the part where we have to go in and do all the typing and clicking that's the problem, right? So if you have the system listening in and intelligently processing it, you get much better notes because the quality of the care is a lot higher than the quality of quickly typing in your notes at the end of the day.
Especially when you have to then, just in case you forget something with the patient, you have to tell the patient, okay, give me a moment, let me record your range of
Yeah.
motion. Give me a moment, let me record this or record that. And that kind of interrupts the continuity of the visit and kind of becomes disruptive. I understand during the history taking, you
Mhm.
have a conversation with a patient about their symptoms and past medical history and any medications they're taking and things that they can and they cannot do. But what happens, let's say, when you do your actual objective type of
Mhm.
evaluation with a patient where you have to take, let's say, some measurements? Do you call out, let's say, and you say shoulder abduction, something like that, so that the
Yeah.
system can pick up that information?
It's a very good point. And when we started getting usage of the system, we saw, the notes are better, right? But what we didn't anticipate, which it surprised us a little bit, is that it does sort of then change how you see the patient, right? Because it can't see what's going on. It can't read your mind either. And I don't think we want to attach anything that can read our mind, right? That'd be a little bit too far. But it's listening in the same way like a scribe, a human scribe or a student, right? That maybe is taking notes for you is listening in. So then we noticed this, that people would start sort of mentioning things or focusing even more on the education of the patient and verbalizing that in a way that didn't previously because they realized that it would get the note generated and it was something that was improving the quality of the care the person was getting in the visit. So for the objective exam, if you're looking really quickly and assessing the, a special test like a straight leg raise or something, they will just say like, okay, I'm going to do a special test now. It's called a straight leg raise, okay, and it helps us, figure out if you have this diagnosis or that diagnosis, and they'll just kind of call it out, almost again as if they're educating a student, but in this case, it's usually just the patient in front of them, and that way the system hears it so it can document it. But the thing that was also surprising is that the patients really like it. When there's a lot of stuff going on in your mind, the patient doesn't realize all the clinical judgment and all the clinical skill that you're bringing to bear when you're seeing them in a visit. And by calling those things out, they see that there's so much more depth that you're not just kind of like looking at them and doing a couple of things. You're thinking through a lot of stuff and it means a lot to you. And verbalizing it so that it gets captured into your documentation is also something that the patients then get to learn a lot more about their condition and what's going on so that they get to be a much more engaged patient over the course of their care too. I kind of assumed that patients would be like, oh, okay, they're talking more, but they get so much more value than we had anticipated from the verbalization of things like the objective exam.
There are actually studies out there that indicate that when you share information with patients, they will participate themselves more in their care.
Yeah.
They'll be more involved in their care just because you involve them. You gave them data, you gave them information that they can then use it. And because when you share with them, let's say, okay, you can do your range of motion here is so much, or your strength is so much, kind of they're thinking, okay, if I'm a bit more motivated, more involved with my treatment, then I can improve that. So they start creating their own metric there for improvement. Okay, so then that will create the note, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how about compliance with that note? How do you ensure that these notes are not just complete, but also compliant?
The documentation assistant, we call it Sidekick. It's your sidekick, your helper, right? When you're seeing the patient. We actually started with that compliance model in the physical therapy and rehab space. And so we had built this whole system that would take in all of the notes within the EMR, split up the sentences, and then a custom model that we built because we learned about this whole compliance problem that you all have to deal with, right? And we were like, oh, well, the models could help do that in a very sort of structured way because people don't want to do peer reviews. Nobody can remember all the rules, right? You don't always have a compliance expert on staff to review everything. So we saw that problem. We realized our models could help, and we built this whole infrastructure and models specifically for compliance. So when the technology had advanced to the point where we were able to do the AI documentation assistant, we had that whole foundation in place. So what we have it look for, how it captures the information, all the necessary items that you need to have a compliant and thorough note, we baked into the generation process. And we're also then able to run our models at scale across millions and millions of examples so that when we're trying to have the model generate really compliant, excellent goals that are functional, we have a way to look at a library of examples in the past that are functional, compliant goals. So we have that foundation. So it's part of a bunch of different layers, the generations, the evaluation, benchmarking that we do, taking advantage of that sort of compliance foundation on top of course, the advancements that we've seen in the space over the last few years.
I have witnessed that with our own therapists, right? When they would receive a score and areas of weakness in their notes, we saw that in time, they improved those areas of weakness, how that can serve as a tool that providing this feedback can improve how therapists are performing in terms of their documentation.
So there's the Sidekick AI documentation assistant, and then we have our analytics tool, which we call Practice Intel, which has both a sort of compliance focus as well as a CPT coding focus as part of that. And that tool we run regularly for folks, and then we can send them back feedback customized to that individual provider. So they will get a scorecard that you can organize, in some various different ways, and then a group can decide that they want to send it, let's say, anybody that has less than a 60 out of 100 compliance score, I want them to get an email so they can see it. You can send it to everybody too, but you can decide how you want to do that. And then they get the compliance scores, the breakdown for it, as well as the areas for improvement, exactly how you're saying. And people want to do the right thing. And it's just a way to really focus it down. So we focus usually on about 3 key items that are the most impactful if you were to improve them, and show them examples of what types of sentences would be in place. And people usually take that because they usually want more feedback than their clinical supervisors can probably provide, honestly, right? Because everybody's very busy. And then they get that feedback to them regularly on a cadence that shows them these are the most impactful things that you could maybe change. In the Sidekick side, you're also just seeing the result in the draft, and it is including statements or phrasing things in a way that we've found to be more compliant as well. So then people are also getting that regular feedback just from using the system, where it's it's making sure to clearly describe that there's a need for skilled physical therapy, right, for this person. So people also, from just kind of seeing that, learn a lot because the model will forget things a little bit less than a human, right? You're busy, you're taking care of a patient. It's hard to remember every single little thing. The model, it's a computer, it's an AI model. It's usually pretty good at remembering things, and that reinforcement in real time is, I think, also very helpful.
Awesome. How about the billing aspect and the CPT selection, utilization, optimization, perhaps? Can you talk a little bit more about that piece?
So there are obviously thousands of different interventions that you can do as a physical therapist. And there's the CPT coding that you can do, TheraX, TheraAct, Neuro, et cetera. And that is kind of a tricky problem to always know exactly, which activity you can count as which thing. And some folks are really good at it. Some folks are a little bit less good at it. But when you're kind of in this gray area of what's my intent, right? Because it's already kind of a squishy thing. My intent is I'm treating the patient for exactly what component of their well-being. You're probably just thinking I want the patient to get better. You're not always thinking about is this going to be functional with regards to crossing multiple joint regions, et cetera? Or is this more coordination or whatever? You have a sense of it as an experienced physical therapist. But then that mapping problem to the interventions and what's justified is usually complicated just enough that people will kind of err on the side of, I'm just going to go with TheraX. And so what we've done is we've trained the model by going through a huge number of examples and data sets so that it will most accurately identify, like this activity or this justification statement, which again, you can write in so many different ways, would most likely reasonably map to this CPT code. And then we provide people that feedback. And, if they're picking a code that's, maybe a little bit too high relative to what they're doing, they can either justify it so that it matches, or they can adjust the code. And you can go in either direction because we want to be accurate. That's the really important thing here. The model is designed to take what you are saying or justifying and to pick the code that it most accurately represents. But when we do that, we see there's actually a 3-to-1 ratio, roughly, of opportunities where people kind of chose Therax when they maybe could have picked Theract, right, or a neuro code. And that yields a revenue benefit, for organizations as well.
It's fantastic.
There are two other things that I know folks really like. One is we have this idea of like a smart dictation. So sometimes maybe you have old notes that you haven't quite finished up yet, or maybe you did a daily visit and you spent most of the time in the gym running around and you want to just take some really quick notes. You can almost pretend the system is, again, like a very competent student that's with you, and then just quickly describe what you did in 40 seconds, 90 seconds, and it will then generate that full note, much more closer to sort of like what you're saying, but still cleaning it and polishing it and putting the content in the relevant sections. And that's one thing that folks like. So you don't always have to record the entire visit. You can if you want to, and you can always combine these two things as well. The what we call auto note, because it automatically generates a note from your conversation, and the smart dictation, because it's almost kind of like a dictation, but you can phrase it very, very casually and very rapidly, and it'll polish it up and turn it into a note. The second thing that people really like is we have what we call Ask AI, which is a HIPAA compliant chatbot, kind of like a chat GPT type functionality that can also see the patient data in your EMR system. So if you're there and you have some quick questions, or you want to draft a letter of medical necessity or something, you can just say like, hey, for this patient, draft a letter for an update to their, referring provider. And it'll just quickly like throw some content in place. And you can edit it or give it other feedback like, oh, make it shorter, make it longer, make it less formal. And you can just iterate with it on, just about anything that your imagination can come up with. We have folks every now and then kind of joke and make like a poem or a rap song based on some physical therapy, content. It's very adaptive.
That's fun. That sounds like
Yeah.
fun.
You can have fun too, right?
Oh,
So it's
absolutely.
nerdy fun because it's usually physical therapy themed, but it's still fun.
Now, there are many practices that have implemented this. I know, in fact, that in our situation, we had significant time savings and improvements on clinical documentation. I mean, you saw people who were like from the 40% and 50% compliance up to above 90%, which was like dramatic in a matter of a few months, a couple of months. And it's important to mention that in the past, we used to hire companies to do our compliance, to actually review our notes. We would select randomly a few notes.
Mm-hmm.
With this tool, 100% of our patient notes on every visit, they were evaluated for compliance. And that was absolutely incredible. Do you have any data about what kind of time savings or efficiency improvements the different clinics report adopting your system?
For compliance scores, we did an analysis basically for a lot of folks on Sidekick usage. And of course, if you only use the analytics tool, the Practice Intel, we see improvements over the course of the year through education and the scorecard, et cetera. But for Sidekick, it's especially striking because it is writing the, at least that first draft of the note for you. So if you start off with a compliance score of a 60 or below, within 2 to 4 weeks, you see a 26% improvement, usually on average, across those Sidekick users. So a really, really big jump for folks. And okay, that's great for people that have some work on compliance to do. But then you could also say, well, if I am someone who I have good compliance scores already, or I'm confident, that my compliance is excellent, there's also then the time savings component. And so we've seen folks go from weeks, like 2 weeks on average, to get their notes signed off to under than 24 hours, right? And so, why does that happen? Well, it happens for a few reasons. One is initial evals usually take the most time. So you can go from like taking from 20 minutes down to like a 5 minutes or less for initial eval. So folks will report like a 75% reduction on their initial eval documentation time. For dailies, again, if you're taking 5 minutes plus whatever, which is still pretty quick, especially compared to initial eval, you can just do a quick description into the smart dictation tool, and within 45 to 90 seconds, get the update. That's a fresh, newly done update, filling out all the key sections, right, for your documentation, for the daily notes as well. We also see shifts on when people are finishing their notes too, since it takes them way less time. We see much less documentation at night and on weekends, et cetera. And we've gotten to present at a couple of the conferences over the years, showing some of that and getting to some very nerdy graph data, but like very impactful shifts for folks.
Fantastic. I see that you guys have reached close to what I consider perfection in terms of documentation and compliance. Okay, where this takes us in the future? What is the future of the AI-powered documentation in the next, 3 to 5 years? Can you fathom any future developments, any future evolution in the area?
We're a bit relentless at the PredictionHealth team, and we always feel like there's room to improve. And I can very confidently say, because we're actively like working and exploring on things, that there's a lot of opportunities to make things more dynamic. And there's piles of analyses that we want to do. And it's not for the sake of doing the analyses, but because I think it would be really impactful to patient care to be able to get more and more data and at scale be able to ideally say to a clinician, for you and for this patient, maybe give them some feedback if there's an opportunity for them to change something. So sometimes patients are higher risk than you may realize, because we don't know perfectly, exactly if this person's not going to show up, for their next visit because they seem disengaged. Or we don't know if this person maybe isn't improving as fast as a patient of this complexity would be expected to improve. There's millions, if not, an infinite number of experiments and questions that you could ask. But the cost of processing the data and each of the visits enough to answer those questions today is a bit too high. But fortunately, the costs are, continuing to improve and reduce. So I think you're going to see, some really great jumps still in what is possible, right? Because we've already been able to get this huge jump, and it took us many years with human effort and data labeling to get to this point, and the model's improving. But I think you're going to see something that's even more active, more thoughtful, and then a very, very difficult goal to achieve, but I think we're aiming towards over this next, 5-year plus period, is trying to do that really deep dive analysis so that, for a lot of patients, people are doing a great job. They're progressing well. That's great. But sometimes, right, there's an opportunity to improve in a way that's very clinically meaningful. And we would love to have the models work in the background, doing work that, humans just don't have time to do. And then coming and presenting those like warnings or suggestions like, hey, if, for this type of patient, we've seen that sometimes you do this and it seems to help and be correlated with success. Like, you haven't done that yet, just like a little reminder. Maybe you didn't think to do it, right? And make it very easy for people to do that little adjustment every now and then for that higher risk patient or their less engaged patient of a certain type to make sure that person gets well.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Those who want to see PredictionHealth in action, PredictionHealth is one of the organizations who are sponsoring the hands-on diagnostics, the HODS Symposium in October, the 12th annual HODS Symposium in Maryland. And those of you who want to find them, please join us. Go to hodssymposium.com and see the information there. But also, how can people find more information online about you, or if they want to meet to do a demo or something like that? How can they get that?
They can always go to predictionhealth.com. Very, very easy to do. If they're interested in prompt and prediction health and how they work together, you can, of course, go to the promptemr.com site as well. And just also really want to call out that, again, we said we wanted to make this easy. There's several ways for folks to try out prediction health themselves. And that's what I would most encourage, right? Like, try it out, like go check it out at the sites, of course. We're happy to meet with you and walk through things because it's, it's healthcare. And these are big decisions and important jobs that folks have here in the space. So we're happy to hold hands as much as folks want, but also there's ways for people to just try it out themselves and experiment with it and see if it works for them. And for a lot of people, it makes a big difference. So again, we're really, really happy to make it easier for folks to just log on, get their demo account to do pilots and things. it's something that we're very proud of, and we're very proud of how much we've been able to positively impact therapists. So the easier we can make it, the better.
Pedro, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate it. It has been incredibly eye-opening, and you have shown us how AI can transform documentation from a burden into a tool that helps to improve care, also compliance, and at the end of the day, financial outcomes through the CPT optimization. For those of you who are listening to the program or watching us right now, if you are tired of drowning in paperwork or worried about compliance, this conversation is a reminder that there are solutions out there. There are tools, and PredictionHealth is a very important tool in that area. Please remember that you can subscribe to Your Practice, Your Money. You can watch us and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more resources, our website, yourpracticeyourmoney.com. And remember, Your Practice, Your Money is here every week to help you build not only clinical success, but also financial freedom. So see you next week. And until then, keep building clinical success and financial freedom. Take care.